Hey everyone, I just wanted to very quickly clear up a few concepts related to intelligence that were discussed in this chapter. So, first of all, the idea of a G factor or general intelligence was developed by a scholar by the name of Charles Spearman. And he basically believed that we could boil down a person's intelligence to one number, to one concept, which he termed the G factor, meaning that if someone is a smart person, they're generally going to be a smart person overall. If someone's of average intelligence, they're going to be of average intelligence kind of overall. And if somebody has an intellectual deficit, that's also probably going to express itself in many areas. We know there's a little bit of truth to this, right? Like we tend to see quite a bit of correlation between high scores on math skills, language skills, and science skills. We also know that whenever there is an intellectual deficit, that a lot of times that does affect an individual broadly. But beyond that, there's a lot of concern with this idea that there's this general intelligence and someone's either smart or not, and it's black and white. They're intellectually skilled or they're not. They're average or they're not, and that it would apply to all areas. Sternberg, who is a scholar who's actually still living, revised this a little bit, and he proposed that there was a triarchic theory of intelligence, meaning he proposed there were three parts to intelligence. There were three factors that we could think of when it comes to intelligence. The first factor is that of analytic intelligence, and that's the book smart. That's being able to learn textbook material, do well on tests, be able to recall information, do well in math classes and science classes and things of that nature. The book smarts. The second category was that of creative intelligence. Um, Having skills related to the creative arts and also having the ability to come up with unique solutions to problems, to think creatively. And the third category was practical or contextual intelligence. And this is kind of the idea of street smarts, of being able to generate solutions to real life problems without necessarily needing an academic background on the subject, being able to fend for yourself, having that level of social intelligence. And Sternberg proposed that all three of these types of intelligence actually operated separately. You could be high on one and low on the others, high on two and low on the last one, high on all three, low on all three, in the middle of all three. He believed that these operated completely separately. And while there may be some correlation between them, that for the most part, these were kind of individual separate entities. And to get a good idea about someone's intelligence level, you could look at all three of these things separately and see how they were scoring on them. The last typology of intelligence that I wanted to overview was that of Howard Gardner. Now, in Howard Gardner's original theory, he proposed that there were 7 types of intelligence. It's now actually increased to 9, and the most recent one that he's added has been that of like an existential type of intelligence, meaning having the ability to think through big picture things like the meaning of life and death and things like that. Within his 9 types of intelligence, he includes things like creativity, analytical skills, but he also includes things like kinesiology or body awareness, right? The idea that the ability to play a sport, make your body move in the way you want it to move is a separate type of intelligence. For example, I'm not good at basketball. I've never been good at basketball. That's not my thing. I do yoga, not basketball. I can understand in my brain how basketball is supposed to work. I see the hoop at that distance. I have this ball. I'm supposed to throw this ball through this hoop. I'm pretty good at math. I could probably sit and do the geometry of the angles that I want to get to. But actually having that control of the muscles in my arm to throw it in such a way where it's going to go into that hoop, that is not something that my body does, right? And Gardner would say that that's this idea of kinesiological intelligence, that you have that sort of connection with your body, that you are intelligent in terms of how it needs to move and operate and function to do some of these activities. He also has things on there related to being in touch with nature and things like that. And I know that your textbook mentions it and has a graphic. One of the biggest concerns about Gardner's theory is, are these actually types of intelligence or are these developed skill sets? So that's just a question to think through with that. The other thing I wanted to overview from this week's materials is the idea of IQ scores and how we categorize IQ. So your textbook includes an IQ distribution chart where you're seeing what are the percentages of the population that score within different IQ scores. As we're, for the purposes of this conversation, the big important numbers to remember are 70 and 130. The average IQ is 100, right? We norm the tests in such a way that the average IQ is 100. So the average is 100. And then remember the numbers 70 and 130. The vast majority of the population falls within this range. Actually, just under 96%, it's 95.8%. 70 and 130. Above 130, 2.1% of the population falls within that range, and that's the range that's considered gifted. Below 70 is another 2.1% of the population, and that's the range that's considered intellectual disability. Now, word on language really quick. Obviously, in our culture, the term retarded has become offensive. It's a term we don't use anymore in psychology. However, it did used to be the accepted diagnostic term within psychology. It was used for a long time. And the medical community actually still uses it in its diagnostic materials. So if you're going into nursing or into any medical field, there is a good chance you will still, in a textbook somewhere that you have, or in a diagnostic manual that you still have, see mental retardation as the actual diagnosis, because they still use that word. In psychology, we don't use it anymore because, again, it's culturally become an offensive term, and we now say intellectual disability. But I just wanted you to know, in case you see any materials that still say that, it's not anybody intending to be intentionally offensive. That's still the diagnostic term that's used in the medical world. I think in the legal world, they still use that term as well. So let's first talk about those who are gifted. So again, the number is 130. About 2.1% of the population falls above 130, and that's within the gifted range. For a long time, one of the things that we believed about gifted individuals was that they were prone to something called the law of averages. And what the law of averages stated was that if you are exceptional in one area, basically the law of averages is that at some point, everything averages out. So if you have an individual who's just exceptional in one area when it comes to their intellect, for example, somewhere else there's going to be a deficit to make up for that. Whether it's social skills or common sense or things of that nature. An example that a lot of people point to with this is the way that Sheldon Cooper is portrayed on the television show The Big Bang Theory. He's very, very smart. He is portrayed as being intellectually gifted. However, he's also portrayed as having quite a bit of social deficit and quite a bit of common sense deficit. And obviously, there's discussions of would he be diagnosed on the autism spectrum, and that's a whole separate conversation for a whole separate time. If you would like to dig into that for your final paper, that would actually be a fun character choice. But the idea being that this is a perfect representation of what this idea of the law of averages was stating, is if you have somebody who is super high on IQ and is incredibly gifted when it comes to their intelligence, somewhere in their life there's going to be a deficit to kind of average this out. And a lot of people believe this for a long time. You can find this in a lot of textbooks. A lot of articles have been written on this. A researcher named Lewis Terman kind of undermined this. He spent, I believe he's still alive. Now I'm distracted. No, he is not alive. But his work is still actively being done. So Lewis Terman has passed away, but his research institute where he studied IQ, especially gifted individuals, is actually still in operation, and people are still carrying out his work. Anyway, Lewis Terman. He spent his career basically studying the way that we test and categorize and define intelligence. And he did a multi-year study on individuals who scored with very, very high IQ to see if he could find any evidence of this idea of the law of averages. And he couldn't. It's an interesting idea. It's something that practically makes common sense, but it's just nothing we've ever been able to support during research. So last thing we're going to talk about is the other end of the spectrum, which is intellectual disabilities. We can categorize intellectual disabilities as falling into one of two categories, either organic based or a cultural familial type. With organic based, what we see is an individual who has a low IQ score due to some sort of like objective, documentable damage within the brain. This can be a genetic disorder. This can be exposure to a teratogen during pregnancy, like what we talked about in the first unit. But this is something where something has actually damaged the brain. And that is why there's a low IQ. Now, this is often permanent. If an individual has difficulties with IQ due to an organic cause, there's often very little that can be done to meaningfully increase their IQ. The other thing that we have is the cultural familial type, and that's when an individual has an intellectual deficit, but it's likely due to something in their environment, something about their upbringing, for example. Now, what's interesting is in these individuals, with targeted and directed treatment, you actually can see markable increases in IQ. So we know that there's some differences in terms of is an intellectual deficit permanent or not, based partially on what causes it and how much improvement can be seen with therapy. Now, what do these individuals actually look like? Because we have a lot of very untrue and very damaging stereotypes. 90% of the time, keep in mind this is only 2.1% of the population in general. So out of that 2.1%, 90% of the time, this is considered a mild intellectual deficit. These individuals tend to score in the IQ range of 55 to 70. They're able to learn skills and self-care up to about the 6th grade level. And so they're really able to do okay for themselves in life. If you've ever been around a 6th grader, like they don't need constant care in the level that a toddler or a kindergartner would. They can do okay. They're often able to hold a job. They're not going to typically be successful in a college environment, but they're often able to hold a job that doesn't require an advanced education, something that would be manual labor, manual skill, that sort of thing. But they're able to hold a job. They're able to function at about a 6th grade level, and they're really able to do okay for themselves in life. The next category is those who score between 40 and 55. This used to be termed a moderate intellectual deficit, but now we just say between 40 and 55. They're usually able to learn skills that are up to about a 2nd grade level, which again, if you've been around a high functioning 2nd grader, they are also able to hold very basic jobs. Require more foresight than somebody, or more oversight than somebody who would be at a mild intellectual disability, but still they're able to reach a level where they're kind of able to do okay. They can have a job, they can engage in basic self-care for themselves. The next category is individuals that hold an IQ between 20 and 40. This is approximately 3% of those who have an intellectual disability. They're able to learn limited self-care skills. So a lot of times, like, they can dress themselves, they can take themselves to the bathroom, they can feed themselves, but they're still going to require constant care. It's like they can feed themselves, but they can't prepare their own food. They can dress themselves, but they can't do their own laundry, things of that nature. So basic self-care, but will always require oversight. Will always require constant care. They're never going to be able to live on their own, for example. And then finally, you have those with an IQ score of less than 25. This used to be called profound mental retardation. You'll still probably find this in some of the medical textbooks. This is only about 1% of those who have an intellectual disability. They're able to develop very limited self-care skills. They might not even have language skills. They might not be verbal. So very, very like basic skills of living will obviously require constant oversight and constant care. So that is a quick recap of some of the big important things in our chapter about intelligence. As always, please feel free to email me if you have any questions about any of the content, and I hope that you enjoy the direction that I chose for our discussion posts for this week.